All right, welcome back to Insights of All Trades. Got Cole with me here, and do we have an insight yet?
Oh, yeah. So, our insight this week is going to be from. I kind of found it on Tools of Titans first, and then dug into it more on the Tim Ferriss podcast with the guy that he interviewed. And it pertains to a type of keyboard. So, the normal, QWERTY keyboard that people use with, the ASDF on the home row, it was constructed in a way so that the most used keys are spread out from each other, because when people were using typewriters, they were jamming them up from typing too fast. They're like, oh, we have to slow people down, so they spread out the most used keys. And then kind of by convention or grandfathering that in, when we got more and more technologically advanced and got to the point where now we're just doing all of our typing digital, we still have that old ASDF keyboard, even though it's really not the most efficient way to do it. So there's keyboards that are out there such as Dvorak keyboards and Colemak keyboards. I just got the Colemak keyboard where the most used keys are all in the home row and they're closer together, and it's supposed to make you a lot faster of a typer.
So how long have you been doing it for then? When did you get it?
I actually got it mid-fall semester, and I was trying to do a homework assignment with it and the first day, and it was taking so long just because I didn't adapt to it, and I have the muscle memory engraved in me from more than a decade of using the QWERTY keyboard that is dang, I just cannot do this right now. And then as soon as the semester ended, I started journaling pretty hard every day just to adapt. I'm getting not as fluent as I was with the OG QWERTY keyboard, but I'm getting pretty close. I could at least go through assignments without breaking my computer.
Yeah, okay. So what if you're already really fast at typing though? Do you think it would actually help after you train the muscle memory again to the faster keyboard?
I do. The study that I heard of, I believe in that podcast that Tim Ferriss did, is that they did a study of I can't remember what occupation it was that types a lot. It might have been not copywriters. Or is it called copywriters? What's that called at a publishing company? That
an editor or something?
Who knows? I'm an insane man.
Yeah.
Regardless, they took some occupation that types a ridiculous amount, and they gave some washout period, not washout period, but adapting period, so that way people could get fluent, if you will, with using that new keyboard. And they typed more than 2 magnitudes of 10 faster, so more than 100% faster than the control group after they got adapted while using, I can't remember if it was the Dvorak keyboard or the Colemak keyboard. They're both very similar. So yeah, I'm in the adapting phase right now. So if you want to stop being an amateur and hop on the Colemak train,
that might be useful for me because, well, and you as well, going into writing soap notes and stuff for in the medical field.
Word, yeah.
That's just all you do all day is just type. So hey,
I was working on a soap note when I tried to make the keyboard switch, and it was just so annoying typing it so slow.
Gosh. I'll have to look into it and see if it's worth it.
We're still young, dude. We have plenty of time
that's true.
To adapt.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we have a young person on the show, as always, pretty much. We got Garrick Paden on the show. He is the youth pastor at the same church that you go to.
Oh, yeah, Cedar Grove.
Yep.
Shout out.
Yeah. So it's a great episode. I think we do end up losing a little bit at the video, towards the end, because some spam callers keep calling my phone, even though, okay, if someone can explain this to me, I had it on airplane mode, and somehow, the spam call still got through enough to, shut down the video. So that's pretty annoying. But anyways, if you're watching the video, 90% of it's there, but at the end it'll probably be blacked out. But anyways, anything you want to say about Garrick before we get rolling?
No, I mean, I kind of touched on this near the latter half of the episode, but he's such an intelligent dude. To listen to him talk, I think he's really good at what I would just call critical inquiry. He asks good questions and he connects dots in a way that, for me, isn't always evident. So to hear him talk, it's I haven't thought about it that way. So especially when you get into muddy waters, creationism debates and evolution debates, to hear how he thinks about things can be kind of eye-opening and be like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, definitely. I found it very interesting, and I hope everyone else does as well. So stay tuned.
And also, this podcast is brought to you by Riggin' It Gear.
Right. Yes, it is. So, thank you, Riggin' It Gear.
Oh, yeah.
So that's I think it's r-i-g.co if you want to just find the store online.
Yep.
Or
if you hop on Insta or definitely Insta, maybe other social media, and just type in Riggin' It Gear, you can find some really cool fanny packs, and there may be more gear coming soon.
Oh, yeah. All right. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Insights of All Trades podcast with Nick and Cole. This is where we talk with people we meet along our journeys through medicine, military service, sports, education, and beyond. We hope you enjoy. All right, we are rolling. Welcome back to Insights of All Trades. I think this is going to be episode 19 if we upload them in order of how we recorded them, which who knows if that will happen. We got our man Garrick Paden with us. What's up, dude?
Dude, not much.
So I'm sure this is going to be a whirlwind of random chatter, ranging from like deep theology to Haiti to who knows what else. So I'm super pumped. But before we get into all of that, I'd love to give people a little bit of a background into like what it is that Garrick Paden does. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of a walk to like how you got to your position at Cedar Grove, would love that. As deep as you want to go.
I mean, how much? I can go way back.
Go way back, dude.
Way back. So, I guess good info for everybody that doesn't know me super well would be, I'm going to start in high school. I was homeschooled, so like applying to colleges was a little different. No guidance counselor to like send transcripts and stuff. So through the homeschool program, I had to like send my transcripts to a guy in Harrisburg who then sent them to the colleges. And I was looking at Lock Haven and Eastern to play soccer. And when I sent the transcripts to him, he was like, yep, sure, whatever, I'll take care of it. And then it was like March of my senior year, getting ready for college. I think it was Lock Haven's coach. One of the soccer coaches called me and was like, hey, we need to get you registered. Where are your transcripts at? And I was like, well, dude, I sent these like months ago, like you should have mine now. So get back in touch with the guy in Harrisburg. And he was like, oh, sorry, I accidentally sent them to Baptist Bible College, which is like a school I had never even heard of. It's like mad tiny, up in Scranton, Clark Summit area. Yeah, and I was like, wait, I'm sure it had to do with like some sort of like school code or something. But when I first heard it, I was like, Lock Haven, Eastern University, Baptist Bible College. I was like, the names aren't even similar. How did you mess this up? But I'm sure it was just like, I don't know, school code or something. But anyways, I didn't really think much of it. Like, I was like, well, can you fix it? And he was like, yeah, no problem. So I was still like planning to either go to Lock Haven or Eastern. I was trying to decide. And then it was like, in the works of all that, my dad's in the military and he was getting deployed to Afghanistan that fall. So I was kind of like going back and forth. Lock Haven, Eastern, what do I want to do? What do I want to major in? And I wasn't really sure. And I have I'm one of 5 in the family. So I had 3, one older sister, 2 younger brothers, and then a younger sister who are all like a couple years younger than me. So my mom was like looking at what life is going to be like as a homeschool mom with my dad in Afghanistan. So I was kind of like trying to decide. And in the process of that, I was like, well, I could stay home and help out my mom, take a year and decide later. So that's what I ended up doing then. And so year goes by, I stayed home, worked, and was still trying to figure out what to do. And my mom was like, had always been pushing like from day one, like you should go to a Christian university, you should go to a Christian school, look at Liberty, she was actually pushing towards Eastern. But then she was like, well, Baptist Bible College has your transcripts, you want to go check it out, do a visit. So that's fast forward a year, the spring after my senior year of high school, after my gap year, I was deciding again. So we went up there, did a visit, and because I was like a young dumb kid, I hadn't really thought much about my decision. I just kind of got caught up in life. So then it was, I guess that summer, I was kind of like, well, whatever. I got to do something, so I go to Baptist Bible College because it was very affordable. I'll do my gen eds and then transfer to like Penn State where my friends were, or Lock Haven again or something, where Colt was. So went to Baptist Bible College. I was telling all my friends, like, yeah, I'm just going to transfer in a year. Let me get my gen eds out and done cheap. And then I ended up staying for 4 years. And the thing with Baptist Bible College, it's Clark Summit University now. Every student has to get a Bible degree. So I ended up doing...
So everyone's like double major by default, in a way?
Basically, yeah, pretty much. So I ended up majoring in biology. Then I had my double major in Bible, and then I picked up a minor in math. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was looking at med school, and as my 4 years of biology came to a close, I kind of was like, well, I've done enough lab work. I like TA'd and stuff, so I had spent a lot of time in the lab.
Weren't you also looking at different like PhD tracks as well?
Yeah, so I was looking into, as my 4 years wrapped up, I was looking at grad schools. Ministry was never on the table, in my opinion or my mind. And we'll probably get into Haiti later, so I won't take that detour now. But Haiti was kind of an option in a way. It had kind of shaped my thinking in the times I had been there. So I was looking at doing something with Haiti, and I enjoy math. So I picked up my math minor as kind of like a last minute thing, and was looking into economic development programs. And that's when I guess it would have been my senior year, I was applying to grad programs. So I like applied to 3 or 4 different programs in a couple different places. And then I actually ended up getting accepted into, I think, everything I applied to. So I was like, all right, well, back to decision time.
Yeah.
So like one university was like Vanderbilt down in Tennessee. Then I applied to the University of Vermont and I think Eastern Michigan University were the 3. And so at this point I'm dating Susan and we're like figuring out like, what's the next step in life? Like, are we going to get married and then go off, or am I going to go off and then come back? And we're trying to figure all that out. So I ended up taking like another gap year kind of, and going back to working with the engineering company, with Clint's company down in Harrisburg. And at that point, I had been helping out at the church, helping out with the youth group, just volunteering Sunday nights, going to events with them, retreats and that kind of stuff. And then the youth pastor at the time left in the spring of my college gap year.
Mm-hmm.
And Pastor Ken was preaching one Sunday morning about figuring out who was going to be the next youth pastor and wanting somebody to be called. And as I'm sitting there in the service, I feel like the Spirit working, like, hey, this is something, you already know the kids, you're already here, it's your home church. Talk to Ken. So after the service, I went up and talked to Ken. I was like, hey, I might be interested. And then, yeah, that week I got lunch or breakfast with him, talked it out, and then went through the formal application process. And fast forward like almost 2 years, and I've been at the church ever since.
What have you kind of grown the youth program into since then? Or if you know, I'm sure the humble Paden language, it might not be worded as such, but what youth program did you start with a couple years ago, and what's your youth program look like now?
I know this is like the only, I guess, measurement is like number of people attending, but I don't really honestly remember what the numbers were like. I know we had less kids at the time, but I hate to even consider numbers as...
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I could throw a party every week at the church and have more kids come out. But that's not really the reason I want people there.
Yeah.
But over the years, I mean, 2 years, not a long time, we've been able to, Susan and I'll say we a lot, I think, and that's who I'm referring to. But we've been able to build some really good relationships with the kids there, and even some of the seniors that were seniors when we first started that have graduated, including your sister. Just like having them, be a part of their lives and inviting them into our lives has been really, really great and cool to see those relationships grow. And that's what I think is really, hard to quantify,
Yeah,
Um,
briefly.
but is more important than how many kids I have.
Yeah, I agree.
What kind of stuff do you do to draw in the youth and the younger people? Because I know at my church specifically, there's only like one or two kids that'll show up on the weekends on Sunday, and it seems like any church that I go to, majority of the population is older adults, probably over 65, and it seems like Christianity around here at least seems to be dwindling a little bit with the younger population. So what kind of stuff do you do to spark those younger people to want to come to church and learn about Christianity and learn about religion?
Yeah, I mean, we're blessed with parents that bring their kids on Sunday morning, which really gives us an open door into getting to know them a little better. And, they know us, they know we're not like weirdos, so they want to come out Sunday night and hang out with us. And I think just formulating those relationships within the youth group and giving them a chance to be sixth grade kids, but also being focused on teaching time and learning. But I also think one of the big areas for us has been just being involved in the community. We have a handful of teens that have come out just from, being involved. We have a couple kids talking to us about going to Impact with us this year. Susan's out and coaches volleyball. I'm out and coach at the soccer team, which is stuff we enjoy doing, but it also lets us build relationships outside of the kids that's parents might bring them on a Sunday morning, which I think is huge.
And what's Impact?
It's a Central Pennsylvania youth ministry. Puts on, it's like a conference down in Harrisburg each year. It's a weekend retreat. It's in March this year, where they bring in a big speaker, and it's basically, he does a couple, I think 3 or 4 different teaching times, and then Saturday we'll break out into group sessions. I'm actually teaching a session this year, so come on out.
And the numbers get pretty staggering just from when I was in there in high school. I couldn't speak to the exact numbers, but in the thousands for sure.
Yeah.
It's quite the youth ministry
Yeah,
conference.
for fairly local. I mean, we don't always think of Harrisburg as local, but I know CPUIM has their reach throughout a lot of different communities in the area that bring in big groups. Probably, I would say there's probably well over, I don't know, definitely over 100 kids from the local area that go down. Probably a lot more than that. That's
Right.
a very conservative number. I think we took 15 or 20 down last year, but I know Matt Warner takes a huge group down. Danny Reed takes a huge group down.
Yeah,
There's probably,
Matt's who I used to go down with.
Yeah.
He's a good dude.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, with whether it's youth group or coaching in the past couple years, I know you have differing age groups ranging from high school to junior high, and even though that might only be a 6 or 7 year age difference, obviously the maturity difference can be big there. What kind of challenges have you faced, and what tactics have you found has helped you along the way?
I mean, I think it's just you got to look at it like you look at school, right? When you look at, kids being in school, you expect more from a senior than you expect from a sixth grader, and the whole way up and down the line, right? And people at different ages learn different ways, and you have to present them with material in a way that they can understand it, and in a setting they can understand it, and not expect the same thing from sixth graders that you do. Seniors. I teach on Sunday morning. I teach senior high Sunday school, and we go a lot deeper and a lot longer. I mean, we take some time and just kind of hang out, because I think that really is important. But we get into a lot more topics, a lot more age-appropriate topics maybe than I would with, of course, the sixth graders. Stuff that maybe they're not hearing, maybe not seeing, or at least not on the same level that their older counterparts are.
Not walking in with a fate versus free will debate with the sixth graders.
Yeah, not getting there yet. And even just talking about sharing my story with them, how I didn't always plan, or never really planned to be where I'm at today, and just as they're sophomores, juniors, and seniors starting to think about the next step, the next chapter in their life. That, wherever you go, wherever you end up, God can use you, and you can live your faith out in the medical field, in, the labor force, in full-time ministry, wherever you go, So it's not as much about what you do, what your quote-unquote occupation might be, but what you do with it and your time there.
Right. Something that's always stuck out to me when I've been around you when you're kind of in that like leadership role, I'd say what's sticking out to me most is just like when we were in Haiti in last July, and of course we had like a fair amount of youth with us. I would assume that's like an above average amount for like a Haiti trip. And it stuck out to me how you never tried to like enforce people, acting accordingly or like, following the rules. It seems like you're pretty good at like identifying what kids need what to like, I don't want to say incentivize, but like to like capture their attention or do whatever it is that you're trying to get them to do. I feel like I don't know exactly what got you there, like that mentality of kind of playing the game a little bit with like understanding what each kid needs to like get their interest to follow along. But I think you understand where I'm coming from. Do you know how you like arrived at that point? Because I think that's a tricky thing to teach, let alone, articulate.
Yeah. I don't know if I can really trace it back to like any one, like thing I read or thing I learned or thing I observed. But I know for me, like maybe going back to my days in homeschool, like my brothers and I mean, Patrice, the youngest one, is kind of like, she was too young to really be a part of like the older four of us. We're all like within a couple years of each other. So growing up, we all had like different learning styles and different ways and my mom was great about that, like adjusting to what we needed. Like both of my younger brothers, Trent and Brennan, are both like super hands-on. Like anything needs fixed or done, like they got it. They'll figure it out.
The dirt bike gurus.
The dirt bike gurus. The car. Brennan's car's like his front end's been in pieces for like rebuilding his motor. Like I wouldn't know where to start, but so growing up, I remember like they're young, like doing elementary school math and stuff. They just hated sitting down at a table with a paper in front of them and doing a worksheet. And so my mom would take them outside and like. We had like a Becca was the curriculum we used, and there was like a lesson and a worksheet for each day. So like the lesson, it would be like teaching like, all right, long division or something like that. And then the worksheet would be implementing what you learned from the lesson. And I remember all the time my mom would like go outside and like draw in the dirt like with a stick when they're like little kids, because like they just hated sitting. They wanted to do something with their hands, and like I don't know, like it worked for them. And like, they still don't have a love for math and stuff, but she taught them in a way in which they needed to learn. And I think that's something that's really great about homeschool that maybe you lack in standard public education.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think my teaching experience in college too, being a TA for 3 years, I got to work with a lot of different people that, some people just wanted to be left alone and get their stuff done, and other people needed help every step of the way.
Yeah.
So I think just from experience, I've seen how beneficial it can be to kind of speak in someone's language. And I've done like stuff like, like the Myers-Briggs,
like
personality tests and stuff like that. Like, I'm no expert, but I've done a couple different tests on my own, and like, it's been interesting with Susan because we're like total and complete opposites, and just like that counterplay of like how we do things and how we live. Everybody's different. Everybody's going to be a little bit unique. You have your typical styles maybe, but people learn in different ways. And really my job is to take the Bible and take scripture and share it with teens and young adults, and however they need to hear it, I think is the best way for them to hear it. I just gotta see how they best hear it, I guess.
So going back just a tiny bit, what was the adjustment like going from homeschool to a structured like undergraduate college setting?
Yeah. For me, it wasn't bad at all. And I know that's not the case for a lot of people. But in my senior year of high school, I like only needed to take 2 courses. I was pretty much done. I had worked ahead, and like I think it was like my sophomore year. After my sophomore year, I didn't need to take any more math courses. So I had kind of done a lot of work ahead, and that started because my older sister was 2 years older than me, and I like did stuff in the same class as her. But then when I got to like sports, I stayed back a little bit, so I was like not like 12 going into high school sports. But because of that, I was able to take AP courses online, which helped me learn on my own, because it was like read this lesson online, go do these problems, and which is essentially like a lecture, I guess. It was more of reading a lecture than hearing a lecture, but it was essentially the same thing, that I was presented with information and I had to, apply it and go do it my own. So I think that was really helpful for transitioning into that. I don't know if it would have been as easy or the same without that year. Maybe it would have been. I don't know. Because like I think once I hit 8th or 9th grade, I started doing like video. My mom was like, all right, I have 3 little kids running around the house. Like, you 2 need to be able to do more stuff on your own. So we had these like DVDs that would like play a classroom setting to us almost. And then we would get to work and go do it on our own. And she was there to like keep us accountable, make sure we were getting stuff done. But it was kind of like watching a lecture and then doing the work on our own. So it was, I think, prepared us a lot for college, that I don't think we were left behind. And I know every homeschool experience is a little bit different, and there's a lot of different avenues.
I like that it's different though, and I haven't put the heavy lifting into thinking about this yet, as I should. But when I start brainstorming about it, it seems like maybe the best education option 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when I have a little one and I'm trying to think about how I can best prepare him or her for their future. And to me, I think it's first off, what you said about how your mom was aware enough to tailor learning styles to them. Yeah. So there's that, but also trying to really get points across that aren't emphasized in like public school today, things about like leadership and even just like health and fitness. That's not like in my opinion properly taught and stressed, at least the importance of it being stressed in like a public school environment. So I think that it's very possible that that could be the best way, as long as you have like a parent that's aware enough, right, and holds them accountable to prepare someone at like the elementary through high school level.
Yeah, I did a kind of deep dive on this topic with my friend Sovik on one of the podcasts. So we were just talking about how there's so many different learning styles that everyone has, sure, but in like the public school setting or even in college or medical school, you're all kind of forced to learn the same way. And then obviously you're going to have like a vast like spreading of knowledge about amongst everyone, because not everyone learns that same way. So some people are much more visual learners. Some people can sit and listen to a lecture, but some people learn better with videos and doing practice problems and things like that. But whenever everyone's forced to be in the same spot just listening for 8 hours a day, you can see how there's people that are more fit to go to trade school, more fit to go to college, more fit to enter the job force. But I think there's got to be some sort of better solution to individualizing approaches with learning for people so that they can, kind of get things a little bit better.
Even beyond that, I'm kind of just thinking out loud here, so I might butcher this, but as, kids are growing up and start, like, developing their interests, of course in high school you get, like, some degree of class selection, but in my opinion, there's, like, only so much that you can dive into your interest, whereas within, like, the homeschool environment, I feel like after you knock out the essentials, you could really help your child like further their interest as far as possible. And like if they want to be, if they're the type A personality that like wants to obsess over something and like really push for it, you can, help them identify the best way to educate themselves on it and then actually do that. And I don't think you can really do that in public school because I don't know how you would scale that up.
Yeah, and now with online curriculum, things are a little bit easier, but I know when we were in high school, there was, you're very limited to what classes you can take. We had like 4 AP classes or something like that at our school, which was 4 more than there was 5 years ago. So, if you wanted to do a deep dive into science or you want to do a deep dive into math, you're pretty capped out at, what the basic level of everything is for all the students. But now that there's like kind of some online AP stuff and things like that, you can do a little bit more of a deeper dive. But I think if your whole curriculum throughout your whole life is tailored specifically to you, you'd have a lot more of an idea of what you want to do. So that is a pretty cool aspect, I think, of homeschooling. So then you got to college and you decided to pursue biology. Have you used that at all since you've graduated? Like, or is that just some knowledge that you have like tucked away?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, most of it is like, I guess, like biology is a lot of rote memorization. So I'm definitely not as sharp on it as I was when I was involved in it as much.
But the ideas are probably still there, right? Like, so what was it like, I guess, if you're, right now you're a youth pastor, you're very tight with your Christian faith. What was it like learning about things like evolution and all sorts of stuff like that kind of sometimes contradict the traditional Christian beliefs?
Well, actually, I mean, since I was at Clarkson University, all my teachers were like professing Christians. They were professing believers. So when we handled topics like evolution, it was taught in a Christian perspective. So we would look at, different areas or maybe weaknesses or flaws in the theory of evolution, which I'm definitely not as sharp on as I was back then. So it wasn't really as if I was learning evolution as taught as truth. I was learning, from a Christian perspective. Obviously, our textbooks were teaching evolution, but then we would take some time and pause and like walk through it and talk through different theories and stuff like that. So it wasn't really like if I was at a public university or maybe a larger Christian university that has to teach in a way that, evolution is fact.
Yeah. I wanted to flip the script to this later. I'm pumped that we're here now. So I think just speaking for myself, but I think that there's a good chance both of you will resonate to some degree on this. I feel that it's not super popular to view Christianity and science as like anything but dichotomies in our culture, and not only do I oppose that, I actually think of, my Christian faith and science as, kind of being intertwined. I actually kind of just feel like a weird walking embodiment of like trying to intertwine my Christian faith and my passion for science. And I have trouble articulating it, but I feel that, although there are some things that superficially are contradictions, at least with the knowledge we're presented with now, I think that as we move forward in time and also just trying to like, I don't know, I guess not look through the lens of, I'll call it contemporary religion or look through the lens of contemporary science, but instead just playing the truth-seeking game and nothing else. I feel that we'll find over time that could be like a deep intertwinement of the two. And I feel like by you majoring in biology and, just with how strong your faith was beforehand, you probably had similar feelings of that. But I have a lot of trouble, I guess, walking to the conclusion, because I don't know where the conclusion is, if there is one that I have. I just feel that that's just like where identity lies is like an intertwinement of Christianity and science.
Yeah, and I think there's like science has kind of become like evolution's become the dogma of scientific thought that like if you don't believe it, that's like almost a litmus test of like, all right, well you're not really a really real scientist, or maybe. But I think when you like look at any theory like that, like science has been flawed. Like if you look in the medical field, up to 30, 40 years ago, there's stuff that was being done that today we're like, oh wait, that's not right. Like you look at nutrition in the 90s, like Atkins diet was the only way to lose weight, and it was like carbs are terrible for you, don't eat them, fats are bad for you in the 80s or whatever it was, right? I don't know the exact time period, but like nutrition is back and forth every decade. I think leeches were used as getting bad blood out up until I don't know when, but it's in modern civilization, right, that like science was around, big discoveries were being made, but we were still flawed in our thinking, and our science was still imperfect. And I don't think the creation of the earth is obviously a highly debated topic, but who was around at the creation of the earth, right? Like that, you might see that as like a cop-out answer, but where's the proof, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's like either you're putting your faith in scientists or you're
Exactly.
putting your faith in your religion or whatever you decide that you want to believe, but there's not really any way for you to actually know.
There's no, right.
Yeah, I mean, there's evidence out there for certain things, but then it's like at that point you're putting faith in the scientists that found that evidence, right? So it's very...
And it's your interpretation of that evidence as well. Like you can
Yeah.
look at one thing and, there's scientists on both sides of the coin that are much smarter than me and have dedicated much more time to the discussion that would look at that piece of evidence and say, oh, that points to a creator, or that points to evolution. Like the one thing I remember that's coming back to me now from my days in biology was looking at like analogous structures of the arm in different species, right? So like you look at a whale, a bird, and a human, right? And we have like a humerus, a radius, and an ulna. And like there's joints and there's structure. It's the same similar structure across all different species, and everyone can be like, oh, right, well that's evidence of one ancestor. You can take that evidence and say, that's evidence of one creator that made one design that worked. So why would you change it? And I just think like that's an example of you take that evidence and you can point it one way or the other depending on
The narrative.
what bias you're bringing and narrative you're trying to push. Exactly.
I agree. I think this is getting deep into theology here, and I have no grounds to be cited as like an expert in this area, but I want to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it regardless. I think that something worth thinking about, both at the highest level of, ministers dedicated to studying scripture and scientists that are dedicated to studying evolution. I think that we have rolled out the possibility that if we have God who's an omniscient creator, why could he not permit, at the very least, microevolution over a period of time? And, we hear as Christians the word evolution embedded in a word, and just because, we hear that and we're like, oh, we have to rule it out. But first of all, microevolution in the sense that there's just changes across the gene pool over time is like in and of itself just happening constantly. So, I mean, I think that we get intertwined in those biases and we don't like want to talk about the possibilities of them actually like coexisting with each other. And of course, I have no idea to what degree of evolution at the macro level that could permit, but at the very least, you can have, these small changes over time, courtesy of like the changes in alleles that are present in the gene pool. And it doesn't make sense to me to say that contradicts an argument for God, because if you have this omniscient creator, why wouldn't he allow adaptations over time through these changes in the gene pool? And in that sense, I don't think they are contradictory, even though people see creationism and evolution as two 100% opposing forces.
So why is it that is it like in the Bible? I guess so. In the Bible, it says like God created man, but does that automatically mean that He didn't create man out of, like evolution from whatever, like primates or whatever? Is that like a contradictory of itself just because He said that God created man, or?
Yeah, I mean, in the Genesis narrative, if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, He creates man first on the first day, and then animals later. But there is a large, I don't know how large, I could never give you a percentage off the top of my head, but that's getting into like theistic evolution. Like there are people that believe, that would call themselves Christians, that would say they have, faith in God and that He created the right environment for evolution to take place. I mean, that's not the perspective I hold to, but there are people that present that theory. And like when it comes to theology and these deep matters, like to say that you're perfectly correct, and there are things that the Bible is very clear about stating, but to say that, well, I have all the answers and your answers are wrong, like, I mean, that comes to a matter of pride. And I think that's really at the heart of the issue, is like with science and creation. Like scientists want to say they have all the right answers, certain people in faith want to say they have all the right answers, and then there's no discussion, there's no debate. You're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong, is kind of where we come to. You can see that prevalent in a lot of different areas of thought in society, that you get this divide of us against them mentality, and it ends discussion there because it's trying to prove the other person wrong rather than understand where they're coming from.
So how do you tease apart certain parts of the Bible that are possibly outdated today? I know there's a lot of criticism and often a lot of hypocrisy on both sides. There's a lot of stuff that's in the Bible that doesn't really pertain to modern day life. So how do you decide that certain things like, say, evolution or lack thereof is still, relevant versus some other things? I can't think of like super great examples off the top of my head, but
yeah, I know what you're saying there, and that's a great question, because I really wanted to answer that question. In the Old Testament, right, there's a lot of laws, and I hear this all the time from people that are trying to poke holes in the Bible and say this is outdated, this is archaic, how do you live according to this book? There's the Levitical law that's given, that God gave to the Israelites. If you read through the Old Testament, you have Leviticus, there's a lot of law in Deuteronomy as well, that was given to the Israelites for their safety. Certain things like, there's rules and laws that are given to them, like don't wear a blended type of clothing, don't eat like crustaceans. There's all these different laws, and within those laws, there's laws that pertain to cleanliness. Washing yourself and being clean, that were given to them that, helped keep them alive. Back in the day, before germs were ever even considered to be a thing, they were being told in Levitical law to clean themselves. And a lot of people will go back to that and look at those rules. And the one they always go to is talking about slaves. But they always go back to the Levitical law and say, how could you serve a God, or how could you live by a book that okays these things? And the thing is that the Levitical law was done away with, like it was fulfilled by Christ. When Christ came, lived and died and was resurrected, we don't have to live according to the law of the Old Testament anymore. But that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand, because I see it all the time, whether it's like a Facebook debate or something like that. Like someone pulls a verse out of Leviticus and is like, what is this law? How do you live by this book? And it's like, well, that law is no more. That law doesn't pertain to us whatsoever. That was given to the Israelites back in, thousands of years before Christ. And, there's New Testament references that say he came to fulfill the law, not to do away with it, but to fulfill it, that Like Romans tells us that we don't have to uphold the law, right? Because Christ came to fill it, and the law was because we were weak and because the flesh was weak, right? We couldn't uphold the law. We couldn't be righteous enough. We couldn't earn our salvation, but we needed a Savior.
Which I think, and I kind of did a much more poor job than you trying to tackle a little bit of that in the podcast that I did with my friend Mustafa, and trying to explain at least the latter half of what you were explaining, and it is that we are, imperfect of following such laws, even in, the commandments in which we are still supposed to follow, or things that, you inherently just know, we'll say in quotations, makes you like a good person. But beyond that, I would say just like actions, words, and intentional thought that glorifies God. And we are by default imperfect and are going to fail. So I think it should point to, at least in obviously my very biased opinion, point to Christianity as being the only one possible way to like this, I don't know, heavenly eternity, because otherwise there's no possibility for us to like right those wrongs, because by default we are just imperfect. So I think without having someone that lived a perfect Christ, or a perfect life, i.e. Christ, and dying for us, as whether you want to call it symbolic, or as I would try to make the case, a literal overcoming of sin for us. Without that, there's no possible way that we can cover that ground. Like, even if you have, a tally of good actions, you could have, 1,000 good deeds and good words said, but a single imperfection by default makes you not good enough for God, who we are called to believe is perfect in his own right. So it doesn't matter how good of a life you lived and how many people like say that you're a good person. You're born as a human and you're going to make mistakes. So I think that it should give comfort and also point to the truth, in my opinion, that we have like a perfect Savior that like came to die for us and essentially help us overcome the certainty that we're going to mess up with those laws.
So I just want to push back a little bit more on what we were talking about with, outdated laws and everything. If everything is outdated in the Old Testament, and I know, modern day Christians follow the New Testament for the most part.
Right.
Why does the Old Testament even still exist in Christian faith? So if a lot of it's outdated, there's still a lot that you pick and choose. I mean, not like us individually, but like you pick and choose parts of the Old Testament that are still good and still worth knowing. So how do you decide that?
Well, really, I mean, the Old Testament exists to point us to Christ. What it does is it shows us the history of man and the failure of man to hold up a righteous standard. Genesis is a lot of history, and really the book of Genesis is about keeping the line of Christ alive. And throughout the Old Testament, what you see is the Israelites continuing to fail. They're walking with God. He pulls them out of Egypt and out of persecution, out of slavery, parts the Red Sea for them to walk through on dry land. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, he comes back down, and they're worshiping a golden calf. Like, there's all these things that happened, all these miraculous times that God stepped in, intervened, and saved them, and they still get it wrong, right? They still mess up. As soon as God's done saving them, they find a way to disobey him again. And what it really shows is that man is never going to get it right. That man is never going to be able to do this on his own, to live a righteous life, and that is pointing to Christ and pointing to the fact that we do need a Savior. And that's really, a lot of the Old Testament is history, and it's painting a picture. There's the prophets as well, prophesying that a Messiah is coming, and, that brings us up to the point of the birth of Christ in Matthew, and, starting into the New Testament, that now is the story of our Savior in the Gospels. And than the start of the church, following in the epistles.
Do you ever get questions of people asking, how much of this should we take literally and how much of this is like a parable or a story that you should learn from, but, maybe it didn't actually really happen this way, but like it's got a great meaning behind it. So like, just for example, like Noah with the flooding of the earth, would that not make that all of us are just now descendants of Noah? Is that how that works? And also, like, do we take that literally as the whole world was flooded for 40 days and 40 nights? Or is that just like, a story that helps provide a meaningful message in the end? I Googled a couple of things, like just in the New Testament, just things that should you take these literally or not? Like Matthew 5:29 says, you should, if your eyes are causing you to lust, you should gouge them out and throw them away. Like, do you take that literally, or obviously not, right? But like, also there, like, how do you kind of tease out things like that in the Bible?
And that's Christ saying, if there's a part of your life, he's using the example of the eye because it's so close to us. It's a part of our body. It's a part of our life. But if there's a part of your life that's causing you to sin, do away with it, right? And I think we kind of get the opposite end of the spectrum, actually, in an area like this, right? I don't think there's as much pushback against the Bible. I think we get more of people, I go to church, right? And my parents have always gone to church. I go most of the time, right? I'm not that bad of a person, and they believe that that's enough to save them, right? So I think I personally, in my ministry, I don't experience that kind of pushback. Mm-hmm. Just in an area like this where, faith is generational, and people's parents have gone to the same church, grandparents, great-grandparents, maybe founded a church, right?
But that seems almost like it's not going to last if that's the way that it's going to be, because you kind of have to draw in people that maybe haven't had their life the whole way, that they've always been going to church and they're always going to go to church. Or if anyone starts to question their beliefs and they leave the church, then their whole, their descendants and everything from there are not going to probably be Christians. So how do you draw in people that have been questioning that kind of thing? And then I guess like you said, it's probably not really happening that much around here,
right?
But just in general, I guess.
Well, that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about bringing kids into the youth group, right? Because if you're trying to, in the church, create a product to draw people in, right? If I'm trying to have the most amazing service with the best lights, the best singers, the best preacher, that's missing the point, right? People are going to come for those things, and as soon as a new church opens up down the street with bigger and better and brighter, they're going to go there, right? And, the faith in the church is about bringing people in through preaching the truth, right? Going out, preaching the truth, evangelizing. Those people hear the truth and say, you know what, I do believe that I was put on this earth for more than life, death, and taxes or whatever, right? And they, they're feeling that longing, that call, God's working in their spirit and pulling them, and they hear the truth, they come in, and then they're discipled, or, just like discipleship in the church, and building a community of people that love one another and love each other as Christ loved us, right? Sacrificial love, and not just creating a product that brings people in the door.
So what do you see your role at, or what do you see the role of the church itself? So if someone would just sit home on Sunday and read the Bible themselves and say they have a really good understanding of the Bible, mm-hmm. and they think they really got it, is the church more to help you tease out those parts of the Bible that are, well, should I take this literally, or should I, live by this in like a figurative sense? I guess, like, what is the purpose of the actual congregation coming together beyond just worshiping God? Because could you not do that on your own, I guess, without, like, the pastor or things like
mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah, I think you can, but I think you miss out on that whole community aspect of loving one another. And really when it comes, as believers, we're, that have faith, that follow Christ, that we have spiritual gifts that we're given to build up and encourage the church and encourage those around us. And if you're just staying home, you're probably not getting an opportunity to use those, whether it's just serving and helping pick up chairs after the service, or, maybe teaching a Sunday school class, or making a meal for somebody that, just lost a family member, just gave birth to a child, just, had an accident, whatever it might be. Christ's work was, we hear the Sermon on the Mount, we hear the parables, we see the miracles, but really his ministry was very, very relational. He spent a great deal of his time in his community, teaching among fishermen, right? Walking around the streets, the disciples, the apostles. Paul was a tent maker. He made tents to keep a living, and then when he was wandering around, in the market, he was preaching, he was evangelizing, he was teaching. And I think that's really what our faith is about is, the church you can come to, you can grow, you can learn, you can hear a different perspective from a preacher, or, you get to hear, going back to learning styles, right? Maybe you're better at learning and hearing the truth of the gospel through someone else teaching it to you, not just sitting down and reading by yourself. You create relationships that can help you keep you accountable. So there's a lot that goes into it that, sure, you can make the case that, well, there's nobody around me. Right? There's a church somewhere, right? And that community aspect, the Christian faith is extremely relational. And I think that's a problem in the modern era, is because a lot of people, relationships don't exist in the same sense maybe that they used to, with people moving around, and that's going way back. But in my one grad class, we were actually talking about that and how the faith has changed over the years, because you used to have, villages in an environment where someone would get married and, live next door to their parents, and then their grandparents were right there, and you lived as a family and took care of one another. Whereas in the more modern world, that doesn't usually happen. Once you, graduate, you go out on your own, you're kind of doing your own thing. But I think the church can provide that family for people that might not have family right near them.
Yeah, maybe this is just like speaking for myself. I don't know if this would be a shared belief among everyone, or like a shared experience among everyone. But, for me, I guess it's just like an encouraging family and friend-filled environment to be around. At least speaking for myself, when I go to college, especially during wrestling season, when, we're more often than not practicing from like 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Sundays, and also, truthfully, I'm just like immersed in study mode. With the exception of when I come home throughout the school year, at the very least during the wrestling season, I'm not going to church at all. And even though I personally would not make the case that, it makes me a worse person or a worse Christian. That's kind of a debate in and of itself, because I don't think there is a such thing as like a good Christian or a bad Christian, and instead just an actual Christian. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that even though I don't think I'm more or less of a follower in the eyes of God, it just gives me encouragement to be around other people that are in the same walk of life, and just like the fellowship of like being around people that are like very loving. And unfortunately, I know that isn't a common experience with a bunch of my friends at school who like either grew up in a church going family that was at I'll say a very traditional church, that they felt like being there was just like, as soon as they walked in the door, they felt like they're just having like judgment cast on them, and it just to them felt role driven, and they felt like there was not a lot of love going around the place. And I feel like I've had almost the exact opposite experience at Cedar Grove. So again, just speaking for myself, and I know this might not be a commonality among everyone listening, but for me at Cedar Grove, it never feels like I'm walking into a place where it's like, we want you to dress this way, talk this way, follow these rules, and come to church this amount of times per year, and like, you're in the club. It's like so much on the exact opposite spectrum from that you can, if you wanted, you could show up in sweatpants at Cedar Grove and, have a sailor's mouth that you're not really aware of, and people are still going to hug you and be like so pumped that you're there. And, you can be standing, worshiping, and you cannot know the words. It does not matter. People are just pumped that you're in the building. So to like have an environment like that, that's nothing but loving and encouraging, I feel like, in my mind, is like the place that the church holds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel the same way with my hometown church here too. Everyone, I even get a Christmas goodie box of home baked goods and everything that my church sends me every year, because they're like, thinking of you. You're not home right now. Good luck with finals. All sorts of stuff like that. It is a very like loving community, but I've also kind of, I guess I think that as far as history goes, it seems like the churches have been evolving, for lack of a better word, because 200 years ago everyone had to be dressed up really nice for church. You couldn't, I think maybe the women couldn't even speak in church. Like, it was just it was so much different than it is now. So how do you guys see like Christianity and the church further evolving across the next 20 years, 50 years, something like that?
Well, I mean, going back, like, the church has done a lot of things, had a lot of customs that maybe weren't the greatest, and the church definitely isn't perfect, because it's, people aren't perfect, and where people are gathered, there's a lot of imperfection, and it's easy to get, a church that, like Cole was mentioning, is maybe a little traditional, or you got to dress a certain way, or else judgment's going to be cast. And I think the church has great potential in the future as we continue to grow into our modern technological age, with, this is a whole topic in itself, but, with smartphones and social media, like, it's so easy to feel connected by observing what people are doing around you, but really having no genuine relationships or connections that you can feel open or vulnerable or go to somebody with your problems. We're presenting a idea or a perspective of who we are through social media, right? And I think the church has a great place going forward in the future to be a place where genuine love is shown, where genuine relationships are built in the name of Christ, and striving to love one another like he loved us. That's a potential I see, and hopefully the church fulfills that potential.
I would make the case that, and even though this is how the church is seen, as at least from the outside looking in, historically, I would make the case that, like, when it's based around like following rules to make yourself right for God, that's what religion is. At least in my mind, that's like how I define religion, is like people trying to follow rules to make themselves right for God, as opposed to having a God that loves man despite like their iniquities, which is essentially what Christianity is predicated on. So I think that people are right to be frustrated with any church experience that they had where it felt like the church was telling them or making them feel like they had to follow X and Y rules and like dress a certain way to be a part of that church, because I don't think that's in any way, shape, or form what the Christian faith is supposed to reflect at all. So I'm glad that churches across the board seem to be making a shift away from that, because I think that is, reflecting what I call like man-made religion versus like God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
It is, I mean, for that same reason, and this gets into real muddy territory, when people are like, are you religious? My instinctive reaction is like, no, I'm not religious. And it's because like people, see contemporary religion like that as like a role driven. You have to be a good enough person to, to make it into heaven, and I like am vehemently opposed to that idea.
It does almost feel like the term religious takes like a negative connotation these days, which I'm not sure it was always like that, like when we were growing up, but definitely you can kind of get attacked for it sometimes, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Something that I wanted to get into that, could also be muddy water is another big debate, and this it kind of goes hand in hand and coincides with evolution versus Christianity, but something I have trouble not just explaining, but honestly just arriving at the right conclusion is the debate among scientists and Christians with time and like how old the earth is. So I don't know if you have done a good job at, or at least explaining your thought process on it, but I mean the gist of the debate is that many Christians believe that the earth is roughly like 6,000 years old versus many scientists believing that it's roughly, I want to say like 4.2 billion, but I may be a wee bit off, but approximately like 4 billion years old. And if I'm going to be totally honest and vulnerable about my thoughts, I really do not know. And something that I have thought about that gets into more muddy water is that, this is just an insane, unanswerable what if question, but like I honestly have toyed around with like this what if question of what if like the years used in the Bible from start to finish, we up throughout translation have translated to years today, and years today we think of as like a 365-day window. But I've thought like, what if like that word we translated was not reflective of like a 365-day period? So I
feel like that can happen with a lot of stuff, because there's a lot that I feel like does get lost in translation from Old English and all that stuff beforehand, and Hebrew and whatnot. So that is another tricky thing, is where do you decide if the translation was even correct?
Yeah, especially with something that's not even close in agreement, as in the 6,000 versus 4 billion years of time.
Yeah, and there are people that hold to the theological belief that in Genesis, when God is creating the earth and it's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, the days are more of eras or long stretches of time.
Yeah, and I've thought that like the same thing about like the day, at like same with years and so on and so forth.
Does it specifically say in the Bible like 6,000 years or whatever?
I think it's more so if you add up.
It's more added times come together. And again, I mean, I'm not a Hebrew scholar and I haven't done the word studies from the original manuscripts, right? Because what is the inspired word of God is the inspired original manuscripts. So when you get into translations, there can be entered flaws. People might look at that and say, well, if that's the case, then how do you believe any of what the Bible says? And I think, if we're placing our faith in a God who created the universe, I think I can believe that he kept the Bible in a form that is pure enough for us to read and interpret. And that's what's so important and vital about, doing the word studies, because you can go back and you can get copies of the original manuscript and look at the manuscripts in their original text. And that's why many pastors have done word studies, or language studies, and are fluent in Greek and Hebrew. I'm getting there. Starting with Greek once I get some time here, but that's what is so vital about sticking to the original language when
Yeah.
you come to a topic of debate or confusion, rather than just debating, go look at what the original text actually says.
Yeah. And this is like the real unanswerable part that I guess I'm posing, but even if you perfectly translate from Hebrew, like, what if the word year, like, 6,000 years ago, like, meant something entirely different, that, like, there's just, like, a disconnect in definition rather than translation that is now lost, for lack of a better word, which is, I mean, it's just a thought experiment that can't really be answered.
Can't really be answered.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, there's another thought experiment you could do, and like the argument for 4.2 billion or whatever the year is like, is that coming from the Big Bang, or is that just whenever? Okay.
Well, I think so.
But either way,
either way,
I mean,
it's
either
more
way,
than a
like,
billion years old is the proposed amount.
So if we want to say, I don't have a strict, like, solid belief on this either way, so like someone could convince me either way, but I'm more leaning towards that, like, well, so scientists will find things like radioactive decay that dates years and years back, but then the argument from a Christian perspective could also be like, why couldn't God have created something like with that level of decay? You know what I mean? Like, it gets tricky.
Right, and I've even seen like that radioactive decay can be a fairly flawed system, because they're testing it at times on rocks that they've come to a conclusion with radioactive decay. It said, well, this rock's 150 years old.
But even if they found like a 20,000-year-old fossil,
Right.
which would be 14,000 years longer than the Christian thing, why couldn't it have been that God created that fossil 6,000 years ago and he made it like
Decayed
this
it.
rock? Well, not even decayed, but he just made the rock already with the fossil in it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you could. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't have a strong leaning either way. I think it would be great to know both sides a lot better than I do, but I don't know. It's interesting because like you can really make an argument either way, and no one can really just prove you wrong.
Right.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts that I've kicked around on it. Also, real quick, per my good friend Google, 4.54 billion years old is the accepted age of Earth among
And is that
scientists.
coming from how long ago is the Big Bang?
Let's find out per Google.
Because then I was also listening to a podcast before where there's like the Big Bang is just a ton of light, and like we can only trace back light as far as like age. So like like however many millions or billions of light years away something is, that's how long you can say, or how old you can say that is. But before the Big Bang was just like a huge flash of light, so any other light before that you wouldn't be able to see. So like things could be even older than the Big Bang. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
which I personally can't comprehend, but also per Google, 13.8 billion years ago is the proposed time of the Big Bang. But something that actually, so I'll say two things that I thought about, which we could do our best to deconstruct. One is that when I was really deep into biochem back in my med biochem days, which is like 3-ish years ago, I got really into enzyme kinetics, like beyond what the class was teaching and requiring of me to know. And the reason I got into them is that while just doing like problems while using like the known literature for like reaction rates of enzymes, you can using enzyme kinetic equations, use those equations to solve for how long a reaction would take place without the presence of that enzyme. So like for anyone who either forgets from high school biology or doesn't know, enzymes are not like affecting the substrates going into the reaction or the products. It's just a biological catalyst, and it's still extremely complex and helps form like a lot of bonds and gets to different complex shapes of molecules that otherwise wouldn't exist without that enzyme being there, which is most often a protein, helping change the shapes of these molecules in terms of like their relation in space to each other. or stabilizing different like structures in between those transition states, and that's getting into like the more complex territory of enzymatic reactions. But anyway, at the end of the day, those reactions still would take place if you have those substrates together, as long as they can interact in space. Theoretically, it would take place without the enzyme. Okay, it took a while getting there, but the point is that you can solve for how long that reaction would take without the presence of an enzyme. So I was thinking of like reactions that I could solve for that time span, reactions that are necessary for life today, reactions like what DNA polymerase does to help like form our DNA, or different enzymes and glycolysis that we need to break down sugar, so that way we can get to like a more usable form of energy. These reactions transcend beyond humans, but like back to unicellular organisms. And I had found that for almost all of these enzymatic reactions, they are speeding the reactions up from like anywhere from like 10 to the 9th to like 10 to the 12th and above,
like millions of times faster.
Yeah. So like millions is usually a low ball. It's often like 10 to the 12 range of like billions of times faster. So I was trying to solve for how long it would take for something like different like DNA polymerizing reactions, and I tried to dig this up through like a Google search, because I like could not relearn enzyme kinetics in like the hour before this podcast. And like the point is that it takes billions of years to do some of these reactions. And my thought is, when the Earth is formed, I'm under the impression that there was not enzymes upon Earth's formation, if under like a scientific theory that like if there was a Big Bang, like there wasn't magically just enzymes, like that has to evolve over time. But if that's the case, then without enzymes, we only would have gotten through like 2 breakdowns of a sugar molecule by now. So it's like, does that make sense where I'm going with this?
But there's also the argument that like life itself has taken since 4.5 billion years ago, since Earth was here, that it's taken that long just for us to get to this level where we are. So like you had to go through billions of years of things just randomly running into each other before you got like the binary replicator, the thing that like can just recreate itself. And then from there, it takes another billion or million years to be able to make like an actual just regular cell with, organelles. And then from there and there and there, you eventually get up to an animal level or human level. I thought where you were going to go with that was like the way we're dating everything to 4.2 billion years ago. Maybe there's this giant enzyme, aka God, that like sped everything up 6,000 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, maybe all these reactions we're looking at that we think take 4 billion years ago, maybe there was a big enzyme that sped it all up, and it only did take, a certain 1,000 some years.
Unless I'm like not thinking about it correctly, there's still like like enzymes in their own right are like most often proteins. So like you need the DNA first to get to like, the RNA transcript and ultimately protein. So the proteins, the enzymes, can't exist without the DNA. And the DNA, from how we understand it, has always been made with like this DNA polymerase enzyme. So like before the enzyme, that reaction had to occur without the presence of an enzyme. And it's like that single reaction would have taken 2 billion years. Right. So it's like you would have like we'd still be probably on like
but I think like even the point of like DNA itself, like you would have had to have billions of years until there would just be a bunch of molecules running into each other before they make like the sugar base for one DNA.
Yeah, I agree, but if that's the case, I guess the point I'm making is that we would need way longer than 4 billion years for that to even be possible. Like way longer than 4 billion years.
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, it's also probably one of the arguments for why there's only life here. You know, there's so much just random stuff out in the universe where there's no life, but we might have been that one lucky spot where things happen to just run into each other enough to create proteins, to create sugars, to create, nucleic acids. Because, like, if the whole universe is 14 point whatever billion years old, and Earth is only 4.5 billion years old, why would there not be other places out there with life if we've been here only a third of what since the Big Bang?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know the answer.
Yeah. And I would just say, too, like, I mean, that's when you look at the topics of biases, right? Like, that everything just so happened in this one place to run together in the right way to evolve to what it is. Like, I feel like that's a lot of hoping for the best. Like, that's a lot of faith.
Yeah, you got to put a lot of faith into science then, and a lot of faith into that what these scientists are saying, or, just what people are saying in general, that, like, all of that would have had to happen to even get to the point where you can talk about, we can even have this conversation, you know what I mean?
Sorry.
What is like the Christian take on whether there's life outside of Earth?
I mean, I think generally you're going to have people that might say different, but generally, like, Earth is it. That God created us here for a plan and purpose. And
is there, because asking you, because I know that you know Scripture more than anyone else that I know, is there claim. Like something, is there anywhere in Scripture that you know of that, like, does discount God making life elsewhere on Earth? Because to the best of my knowledge, there isn't.
Not that I am aware of. I mean, there's a lot that talks about, like, his handiwork is displayed in the skies. Like, we can look at the galaxies and the universe and say, like, well, he created all of this that show us, his strength and power and might. But to say that there's something that directly, I don't know of, and maybe there's something that I'm blatantly missing. But I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of anything.
Yeah. As far as I know, too, there's not really anything that says there's not stuff out there, and there's not anything that says there is other stuff out there. It's just kind of maybe one of those things we gotta figure out.
Yeah. I was listening to an astronomy podcast on ologies with Allie Ward, and the guest she had on, whose name I'm blanking on, was like an astrophysicist, and he was saying that just in the Milky Way alone, so like our home galaxy, and I don't know what parameters they were using to make this claim, but he said there was over 9 billion Earth-like planets just in our galaxy. It was either 9 billion or 9 million, so I know I might be blanking on a plus or minus 10 to the 3 but regardless, it was an absolute mind-boggling amount of Earth-like planets, and I think that was based off of, like, existence of water and, like, temperature and atmosphere related markers. But, like, even just hearing, like, some staggering amount of quote-unquote Earth-like planets from an accredited astrophysicist in our own galaxy is insane to me, because the way that many astrophysicists think of it is that it's an impossibility that there isn't life out there. And that kind of gets into, like, I believe it's called the Fermi paradox, that it's like, okay, if physicists calculate that it's an impossibility that there's not life out there, then where is everyone?
Yeah, like, where are they? Yeah. That is interesting. There's another, like, theory, I think it's Nick Bostrom that talks about it. Basically, there's, like, some great filter out there that at some certain point, civilizations just can't keep going. They just, everything just stops working. So
AI.
there's so many theories out there. It's hard to understand.
I have a thought about that, but I don't know if we can take a break. I gotta go to the bathroom.
Yeah, go for it,
Take a
dude.
break.
Anyway, I think what I was saying was, so we were talking about the Fermi paradox and the great filter. I was talking about how AI might be the great filter, which
Could be.
leads to the end of civilization. But I mean, who knows?
Stop Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I think he's like pretty openly scared about it, actually. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
the other thing that I was thinking about that pertains to like I wouldn't even say time argument, just like creationism argument, that I just can't get around with the Big Bang thing, and maybe this is just my limited human mind, but for the Big Bang to occur, or even whatever existed before the Big Bang, so actually whatever I'm talking about precedes the Big Bang, like there has to be a belief in place. If you're going to believe that there is no God, there has to be a belief in place that there is something that just infinitely exists, or that something can come from nothing. Like one of those two beliefs must be held, that I personally just can't wrap my head around believing, because all of this had to have come from something that either A, didn't exist and somehow manifested into existence, or there's something that infinitely exists, and to our knowledge, like all elements have like this like decaying, do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I don't think there's like, honestly, I'm pretty like not too optimistic that like we're ever gonna know the answer to that kind of stuff.
I agree completely.
It's just I think it's beyond our own like human like understanding and comprehension that like we could even understand. It'd be like trying to explain what a computer is to an ant, I think. I just don't think we would be able to understand it, even if maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. That'd be cool to actually know like everything like that, but it's just whenever you even start talking about something like 14 billion years, like I can't even understand like what 1,000 years would feel like. It's just
billion is just so huge to even wrap your mind around. Like I forget, I think it was like Jeff Bezos. Somebody was likened it like, I forget what the dollar amount was, but it was something like a yearly salary. That if you made a yearly salary like every day, it would take like thousands of years to have the amount of money he has now, or his net worth, like
insane.
to accumulate his net worth. And it's like, you hear billion, and you're like, wow, that guy's pretty rich. But like to actually comprehend what $1 billion is just like absurd.
Yeah, and then throw that onto years and
like how far it goes. Yeah,
and then they do that on light years. It's like this thing's like
That's
a
even-
billion light years away. It's like I don't even know how far a light year is. Like
That's a
how
long
fast
time.
does light travel in a year? Like to me, it's like it's right there every time I click the light switch. So yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. It's fun to think about, but it's also like almost just like sad. I don't think I'll ever understand it.
That's fair. But in my head, that really is like, if I was trying to make an argument without using scripture, with why I believe in God, even without getting into the nooks and crannies of convincing someone of the Christian faith being the truth, but instead just convincing someone that there is like a creator. To me, I like the most convincing thing, in my own opinion, is that I just cannot grasp how some matter of any sort, let alone like the intricate earth and universe that we live in, could come from absolutely nothing, or even more insane, that there is just like some matter that infinitely exists with no creator or creation.
Yeah, that almost sounds close to like an agnostic approach too. It's just like I don't know, like I have no idea like what that would be. Like if you find out, let me know. But yeah, no, I agree though. it's a convincing argument for why it's not, why science doesn't answer everything, I'll just say.
And I think that's a great example, too, of, like, this whole concept of, like, where did it really come from if you dig down to the very beginning? And, like, I don't know if you looked up the 9 million or 9 billion Earth-like, but the Earth-like planets.
My bad.
No, it's all right. If they do, either way, 9 million's a lot. 9 billion is a lot. But if there's that many Earth-like planets, you know, maybe you talk about a great filter out there or something, but, like, to have faith that, like, might just so happen to go right here is crazy. I mean, because, like, the scientific approach is usually, like, well, I exist and my life is based in rationale and not, I don't just take things for granted. I know and therefore I act. Like, faith doesn't exist to me. It's kind of like their argument against a faith or Christianity. And it's like, yeah, you say that, but, like, do we, you know, when we're digging in here to the Big Bang, like, do you know?
Right.
Why doesn't life exist on those planets? And, like, you know, there's faith there, but there's also faith in, like, your daily life. Like, you get on an airplane. Do you know that airplane is going to land safely? Like,
Right.
There's a lot of faith in your life,
like,
when you're trying to say...
Even just driving in the car, you're driving in, like,
Right.
2-ton, like, metal thing that, like, it's going 60, 70 miles an hour.
Another
like,
one 2 feet away.
Exactly.
Like,
You have to put a lot of faith in that.
there's faith everywhere in our lives that, like, people are like, I don't live my life based on faith.
Yeah. But I think another reason that a lot of people have, not hatred, but just, like, a negative view of Christianity is because I know Cole doesn't believe there's good and bad Christians, but I think there are a lot of bad representations of Christians out there.
Yes, I agree.
A lot of people that just they put themselves up on a pedestal, which isn't really the Christian way of doing things. And they put others down because they're not Christian. I think the nice thing about this conversation is we can talk about all the fun, like, ideas of, you know, well, is it this or is it science or is it Christianity or, you know, is, you know, even Cole had a podcast with his Muslim friend, Mustafa. Like, they can tease apart these things and have a nice, like, intelligent, fun conversation about it. But there's a lot of people out there that will just stand fast and be, no, you're wrong, this is exactly how it is. You're a terrible person for not believing that. And I think that's one of the big reasons why Christianity recently has been kind of taking a hit, because there's a lot of people out there that are, like, hypocritical with things. A lot of people that don't support other people just because of, you know, maybe their views on certain science or their views on, you know, who they can be with and who they can do. You know, there's just so much out there that a lot of people, I think, kind of have a bad taste in their mouth when they hear just the word Christianity.
Yeah, which is frustrating here because at the most fundamental parts of the Christian faith, we're, like, called to love everyone. So that's, I'm, like, aside from the good versus bad Christian thing, because in my mind I just think of that as a way of, like, no amount of good action sets you apart, like, in the eyes of God. There's absolutely, in my opinion, very bad, I'll say, spokespeople for the Christian faith, because they make people think that Christianity is, you know, a following of rules, and if you don't follow them, then we hate you, or if you just simply disagree with what I believe, then, like, I don't even want to look at you, like, you should be scoffed at. And those people are, in my opinion, no way professing the Christian faith, even though that they say they are, because if it's not coming from a place of loving someone, even if you disagree on something as fundamental of your belief principles on, you know, how we're here and why, like, you should be able to love everyone regardless. And I think that's, like, one of the most fundamental premises of the Christian faith. And yet, unfortunately, there are some spokespeople out there that say they are, you know, ministering when actually they're kind of either putting others down or at the very least, like, I don't know, separating themselves from others.
Yeah, or they'll do negative things in the name of faith, you know. Just obviously one that's very well known, and one that most, probably 99.9% of Christians don't support, is that Westboro Baptist thing, where they'll go to funerals and things like that and do that in the name of God, but they're really just hurting other people so much that that's not Christianity, you know what I mean? But that puts that out there in the media and puts it out there as that's, you know, that's what the...
And it's easy to point to that example as, you know, that oh, that's Christianity, I don't want any part in that. And that's the tough thing about Christianity, right, is because Christians are the body of Christ here on earth. Christians are the example that so often people from outside the church look at and say, well, they make a judgment. I don't want to be like that. Or, okay, that person's, you know, I see them loving others. I see them living a life for something more. I want to be a part of that. And, you know, that's the tricky thing is, like, Christianity has been so intertwined in, like, life and politics in America for so long that it's become a cultural thing to a degree. And I think we're at a place where we're kind of stepping away from that to a degree. But that it's like, yeah, I've always gone to church, so I'm a Christian. And then, like, Monday to Saturday evening, I do whatever I want. I live however I want. And now the world is seeing me call myself a Christian when really I don't even, you know, care about Christ or his life or how I live my life. And there's actually an interesting, in First John, John's writing about this, pretty much this exact thing is, in the early church, there were a lot of Jewish influences from culture, and people were kind of struggling with, like, well, do I follow these rules? Like, now that I'm a Christian, I've lived my whole life in Judaism, and I followed all these rules. Now I'm calling myself a Christian. How do I live? And then there were all kinds of, like, Greek mythology and, like, all that was kind of blending together in these churches, and people were like, how do I live my life? And that's why you see in the New Testament a lot of people, you know, talking about how you live your life. And in First John, there's a lot of people, and, you know, John's basically saying to the church, like, your example or your proof, the proof of your salvation is your love for other people. The love that you show to those around you is the proof that, like, yeah, I believe. And, like, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but when your life doesn't support that statement, when your life doesn't support, you know, Christ and his teachings, are you really a Christian? And it's really just a call to, like, if we're going to call ourselves Christians, well, then live like it. Don't just call yourself a Christian and then do whatever you want. There was, like, all this, like, Gnosticism back in the day that was, like, it kind of came out of Greek culture, but it was, like, the thought that the spirit and spiritual things and, like, spiritual knowledge was good, and that anything physical was evil. So people were like, oh, well, I'm a Christian because I have this knowledge. And then they would go out and, like, well, you have a physical body, so you're evil. So however I treat you doesn't matter. And then they were, like, calling themselves Christian, being a part of the church, and then going out and, like, being terrible people. Yeah. So that's what John's kind of writing about in First John. And I think it's really interesting because, like, anybody can call themselves a Christian, but do they live in a manner which shows love to other people?
Yeah. I don't have a ton to add. I just have this funny meme I found. It goes... So basically what it is like Jesus is telling everyone, like, love everyone, you know, no matter what. And somebody's like, oh, well, what if they're gay or they believe in other gods? And he goes, yes, even if they ask stupid questions.
And I think that obviously that's a meme, but, like, I think it brings up a good point. Like, what is loving people that you disagree with? And in Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, which is, like, not really known, people think it's Barnabas, but it's not exactly known. But anyways, that's beside the point. I think it's in Hebrews 12 maybe, but it's saying that a father, talking about God the Father, if he loves his children, he'll discipline them. And a lot of people, like, because you get that divide of, like, well, if I love and there's no discipline, like, you think about a parent raising children. If you love them so much, love them, that's in quotation marks if you're just listening, but air quotes. If you love them but don't discipline them, how much do you really love them? Because, like, they're going to grow up to, like, not know discipline and not know authority. So it's saying, like, if you actually love somebody, there will be discipline. Like, if I see you doing something that I think is harmful to you, I'm not just going to let you go on doing that. Like, the example I've heard before is, like, if I have a child that's, like, running around with, like, a fork trying to stick it in an electric socket, I'm not going to say, well, they really want to do that, so it would be loving for me to just let them do their thing. Like, no, I'm going to stop them and say, don't do this because I think that's harmful to you. And then you get into, how do you love somebody that lives a lifestyle you don't agree with? How do you love somebody that, is doing things that you think are completely against the word of God? And that gets tricky, like, because you want to show them love, but you don't want to come down with a hammer like, you're a terrible person and you're never going to amount to anything if you keep doing that. But you also don't want to see them harming themselves. And I think, because I hear and see in culture a lot today, people saying, well, why do Christians go around telling people how to live their lives? Why do Christians go around sharing their faith? And this was, I don't know if you're familiar with Penn and Teller.
Mm-mm.
They did like Las Vegas shows for a long time. They're like comedians, magicians, something. I don't know. I'm not really familiar with their work. But they have I forget which one's which. It's like two guys. Anyway, one of them, they're staunch atheists. And after a show, this guy came up to him, and they've been known to, like, really tell people off before. Like, they're pretty brash guys. But the guy came up to him and was like, hey, I just really feel like I'm supposed to share my faith with you. And he went up and shared, like, the story of Jesus with this guy. And Penn or Teller, whichever one of them was like, all right, thank you, like, have a nice night. And the guy was like, you're not gonna, like, yell at me or scream at me, like, I thought you were gonna freak out. And the guy's like, no, like, honestly, your faith believes that if I don't know the truth, I spend an eternity in separation from God. Like, I spend an eternity in hell. How much do you have to hate me to not tell me that, right? Like, if you really truly believe that the only way to avoid that eternal suffering is to come to Christ, why wouldn't you tell everybody you know about that? If that's your real, true, genuine belief. And I think that's, like, kind of my answer to people, like, well, why are you sharing your faith? Why do you bother trying to tell people how to live or how to change their lives? And it's like, well, because if they don't, this is where I believe they're headed. And how much would you have to hate somebody to just be like, well, enjoy, go on your merry way, and just let them head that direction?
Yeah. The argument against the whole eternity in hell if you don't accept Christ is, everyone's born in different circumstances. Mm-hmm. So there's people that are going to live their whole life without ever even hearing, like, of Jesus Christ or anything like that. So how is that fair, I guess, that person should suffer forever just because they were born in a situation where they're not going to ever be exposed to it?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know the reference. I had a professor in college who said references aren't inspired word of God, so it's a thought that counts. But there's somewhere that every ear will have a chance to hear the truth. And if you look at, like, old civilizations and old tribes and stuff that you wouldn't think they have had the chance to hear, like, they have stories that, like, when someone made contact with them, they had, like, their God, quote unquote God, that they worshipped. And a lot of times, like, it follows, like, there was a great flood, there was a great tragedy, and then, God sent his son to the earth. And it's like, they don't have a Bible, they don't have a scripture. I don't know where they got those stories from, but, like, there's examples of that where, like, they have stories that very much parallel the Bible.
Well, yeah, even whenever I listened to Cole's podcast with Mustafa, it was like pretty much everything he was saying sounded like it was just it's kind of a spin on Christianity. They have one God, they have the prophet Muhammad, which, like, parallels Jesus. And
yeah, well, they still do believe in Jesus.
Yeah, and he even said that, they still believe in Jesus. So it's like, I don't know, there's so many similarities if you go back. I mean, obviously Judaism or Christianity was bloomed out of Judaism, so there's so many similarities there as well. I don't know. See, I wish I knew more about, like, the Eastern Asian religions, because those seem to know. There seems to be a lot there too. I just haven't really dived into those at all. But really, it seems like there's so many similarities between these things that I guess how important is the actual label of Christianity versus just the belief system that's behind it.
Well, I think that, I mean, when it comes to Christianity, the ultimate, like, we're going to have theological disagreements. I'm never going to line up exactly with someone on all my theological beliefs or how those play into our lives. But, like, at the core is the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And, like, yeah, you might have different beliefs than me, but, like, if you agree on that much, like, I think that's faith. Some people refer to it as like saving faith. Like, that's what's necessary. If you have everything else wrong, but you have that much, that's enough. But when you look at other religions, right, then you get different stories.
I was just going to say, it seems more important to me that somebody would have the framework of basically just being a good person and loving others, being kind to others and stuff. I feel like that feels more important to me than someone accepting that Jesus died and came back and all of that. Because obviously that's a very important, that's the core part of Christianity. But if someone can live their life as a great quality person helping so many others, but they don't believe that one specific event, does that mean they're doomed for eternity? I mean, some would say yes, but I don't know. It's just it's a tricky situation, I guess.
Right, and I mean that's what comes down to, like, Scripture, right? We'll say we're all sinners, right? Because sin entered the world through Adam and Eve, and because of that, we are all sinners, and all of us have done something bad, right? We can all agree that everyone has done a bad thing, and looking at the Christianity and the framework of the world, right? God created the earth, and He is purely holy. So for us to exist with Him for eternity, we ourselves have to be holy, but we can't make ourselves holy. So even though we have done a lot of good things, maybe, that doesn't mean we're holy, right? We can never work ourselves or outweigh our bad to make ourselves holy. And yeah, I mean, it sometimes feels like, wow, that's tough. But right, the truth of it is all of us are undeserving, right, of that holiness. And it really isn't asking a whole lot.
Yeah.
To have that faith. And I don't know the logistics of how every ear will hear the truth, but I believe that God can make that happen, right? If we believe He can make the earth and everything in it, I believe He can create or orchestrate a scenario in which everyone hears the truth, and if they heard it, then they're responsible to respond to it.
I guess just the only one more devil's advocate thing here is, a lot of other people will say that, if your God's so loving and loves humans so much and loves humanity and loves life so much, why would He ever sentence someone to eternity in hell? Regardless of, maybe they didn't accept Jesus Christ or whatever they did. Why would such a loving God ever do that to someone?
Right, and that, I mean, if you want to read more into it, Romans 1 is a good passage. I'm not going to recite the whole thing, but really it comes to, like, we have, and this is opening up a bag of worms, I don't know where Cole's going to go with this, but we have the choice, right? God's not going to create us into robots that serve Him and do whatever He wants, right? He gives us the option, the choice that, there's things in this world, and Scripture will say that, that's Satan, the devil, trying to draw us away from God, trying to make us disobey and be caught up in whatever's going on around us, that we never turn to God. And by loving us, if you're a parent that loves your child, you're not going to orchestrate their entire life. You're going to give them the chance to live on their own, right? And that means they're going to make mistakes. But ultimately you're going to hope that they come to, as a Christian parent or just a parent in general, you're going to hope that they come to a life that is meaningful to them, right? You're not going to, loving them isn't locking them in a room so that they don't make mistakes.
Yeah. Also, just like adding on to that, I'm not sure if this is where you thought I was going to take this or not, but robots.
I was thinking free will. And,
yeah, right. That's where I'm heading with this.
Okay.
On top of that, I feel like it's hard to make the case that you can say that, like, God is love unless you're granted, like, a life of free will and thus like the possibility for like I'll just chalk it up as we'll say a very good eternity versus a very bad eternity. But even if you don't look at it in like a, you know, deemed to some type of eternity sense, I don't know how we can say that God is love if we aren't granted like access to kind of live on our own accords, because otherwise it's just like a kind of, this sounds dark, but like a glorified slavery. If your whole life from start to finish is perfectly orchestrated in a way that like you have no say in, you know, where you end up and like the type of life that you live. So I think that's like kind of one of the pillars of arguing for free will, at least within when talking about it with people who share the Christian faith. Obviously it's a whole different kind of debate when you're kind of talking about fate versus free will outside of the Christian faith, but at least that's how I think of like why heaven and hell might exist, is that if we were just granted access to heaven, then, and also on top of that, like if we're still saying that you have to be like, you know, made holy to get into heaven, then you aren't going to be living on your free will. You're going to be like, to use your verbiage again, orchestrated in a way that like you're made right for heaven and then you get in, as opposed to like finding that path on your own, or at least making that walk of faith your own. Yeah.
I mean, it just comes down to choosing that love, right? To choose God is to demonstrate your love for him, and not, you know, is it love if I force you to do it? Is pretty much the summary, I guess.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a good answer. I guess I don't have much for that.
Dang, there was something else I was thinking of, but my mind trailed off when I heard free will. I guess I'll kind of flip the page here a little bit. I guess it's kind of still under the umbrella of maybe things that Christians get a bad rap for, and that's being not big critical thinkers, because, you know, you're chalked up under possibly someone that has like a blind faith and doesn't ask good questions and doesn't know what they believe and why. But truly, when I think of like top 5 critical thinkers that I know, I 100% think of you. And I think maybe a kind of funny example that I wanted to bring up and have you kind of walk through is, and maybe I shouldn't even say just critical thinker, but just like willingness to question the status quo. And I don't mean like just overtly disagree with the status quo or overtly disagree with anyone, but I mean, you ask good questions and you're willing to look at things differently and think like, oh, maybe things could be this way and such and such and such, or maybe I could do things a little bit differently than others are doing. And Christians don't necessarily get that rep across the board. So something that I wanted to talk about is how you approach the Christmas Eve service. It's so, you know, probably the most traditional Orthodox way to deliver a Christmas Eve message to a couple hundred people would be to, you know, to talk about the birth of Jesus, since you're all there on Christmas Eve. And, you know, I would say that's just like the gist of what you would be expecting when you show up for Christmas Eve. But when I went to Cedar Grove for Christmas Eve, I listened to Garrick take the most unorthodox route to a Christmas Eve message, namely with the Judah and what's her name? Tamar story. So I don't want to spoil it, but could you kind of wrap up like how you embedded a message within that story?
I'll go back to the beginning of my work, my way to Judah and Tamar. So the Christmas season, I think, in the church, a lot of times, the cliche that is running through everyone's head all the time is, remember the reason for the season, which is true, right? Like, there's so much going on around us, just busyness of the holiday, right? That people say that and people spout that out from a good point, from a good place, that they're trying to say, remember why we celebrate Christmas, which is the birth of Christ. And as I was thinking about that, it just stemmed out like, yes, that's a good thing, that we should remember the season and remember to celebrate the birth of Christ at Christmas. But shouldn't our lives revolve around that? Shouldn't our lives revolve around the fact that we're not in this world to make this world the best, or not to give ourselves the best life in this world? We're here, right, to share the love of Christ with those around us. And it's this divide of being in the world, but not being of the world, right? We live in the world, but we don't have the same, maybe, values as the world around us. So I was thinking about that. And I was thinking about, right, what causes us to disobey? What causes us to walk outside of the will of God? And that's where my 3 salient 3 points of the message were talking about Eve's disobedience in the garden, which came from a place of, she saw the fruit of the tree. She saw that it was good to eat. She saw that it was pleasant to her eyes, and she saw that it would give her pride, right? It would make her wise. It would give her something to be proud of. And I think that our lives as believers, or even as non-believers, we get caught up in those 3 things. Like, we want things that are attractive to us, we want things that will satisfy us, and we want things that will make us proud. Those are going to vary wildly from person to person and which one you struggle with more. But I think being in the world and being of the world is putting to death those desires. Like, I live to share Christ with those around me, not to have a nice house or car or be proud of the things here on this earth. So I walked through that as my example of like disobedience. And then the next step was talking about obedience, right? How we're called to obey. And I used Mary. So I kind of talked about Christmas Story a little bit. Because in all those aspects, like when she was told she was pregnant with Jesus, the Son of God, right? She's like a 14-year-old girl who is living in a society that would put her to death for being adulterous in her betrothal. So like she had to put away all those fears.
What does betrothal mean?
So it's kind of like an engagement, right? But at the time it was like an arranged marriage. So like you were betrothed to be wed, and then for like a year you kind of got all your orders or all your things in order to actually have the wedding. And it was like, it actually required a divorce to break up. So it wasn't like, oh, we're engaged, we're not engaged. It was like, you're basically married, but you're just kind of transitioning into the wedding.
Gotcha.
And then from there, I went to the story of Judah and Tamar, which I'll break down. But the reason I went there was because we're not always like Mary. More often than not, we're like Eve, and we disobey. We get caught up in the things of this world. We don't always walk as we're supposed to walk. We don't always live as we're called to live, putting others before ourselves. And I think the picture of Judah and Tamar is a story of redemption, and how God can work despite our imperfections. So the narrative, I'll try to summarize it here quickly, is so Judah gives birth, doesn't give birth, he's a guy. Judah gets married, and they don't even list his wife's name in the story. But he has 3 sons, and in Jewish culture at the time, having sons was a big deal because you carried on your lineage, you carried on your name. Like for a woman, one of the biggest honors was giving birth to a son. So Judah has 3 sons. It's it's like Er is his name. And then Onan and then Shelah are his 3 sons. His oldest son gets married, and God saw that he was wicked, and according to the text, Genesis 37, if you want to check it out, he dies. God has him killed, he dies. Some way God orchestrates that he dies. And then this is like the interesting part is in the culture at the time, there's like the law of the brother-in-law, where if your older brother got married and died, you were supposed to step up and take place, as long as you weren't married already yourself. Step up and take over the role of the husband for Tamar. So Onan steps in and takes over, and he's supposed to consummate the marriage and he lays with Tamar, we'll put it that way, and as the text says, he emits on the ground, so pull-out method, and he doesn't give birth. He's supposed to carry on, consummate the marriage, and give birth to a son to carry on the line of Judah. That's the thing, or the line of Judah, but it would be Er's son. It wouldn't be his son. His name would die off. So rather than doing that and honoring his brother, he doesn't obey God, and he's killed. So now it's down to the last son. Judah says, you know what, Tamar, he's a little young. We don't have an age, but we're told that this is kind of Judah's excuse, that this son, I'm going to keep him for myself. Story goes on. Judah's wife dies at this point.
So based on like Old Testament law at this time, would Judah be like considered disobeying God by
withholding that? Yeah.
Okay.
He was supposed to give. It wasn't technically Old Testament law at the time, but it was kind of the custom of the time. It becomes Old Testament law later, so we see that it's kind of in agreement.
Okay.
So he kind of disobeys, doesn't give the son. His wife dies, and he goes up to this Canaanite festival it's like a big sheep shearing festival, which in the time was kind of like a big fertility festival. So he goes up. Tamar hears that he's going up to this festival with his friend. She goes up, dresses up like a town prostitute, and sits on the wall in his path. He goes up, basically says, all right, what do you cost? And he says, you know what, I'll give you a young goat for my flock. And he says, I don't have the young goat with me. So here, take my staff, my cord, and my ring. Gives them to her and says, whenever I deliver the goat, I'll take these back. It's the IOU. So he lays with her. She gets pregnant. Time goes on. He doesn't know she's pregnant. He goes back home.
Because he didn't know it was her the whole time.
Right. He doesn't know it's Tamar. He did not know it was his daughter-in-law. So eventually he sends his friend to deliver the goat. She's not there. Where's the temple prostitute? There isn't one here. So he's like, what? What's going on? Then someone comes to him and says, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, is pregnant. And he's like, what? Have her put to death. Like, what's wrong with her, that adulterous woman? And then she comes up and she's like, you know what? I am pregnant. I'm pregnant by the man who owns these things. And gives him his ring, his cord, and his staff back. And he's like, yeah, whoever owns these is who I'm pregnant by. And that's kind of like the end of the story. He's like, he sees he's wicked and he should have given her that son. And he saw his wrongdoing.
Quick pause. Imagine a majority congregation of like, or maybe not the majority, but roughly 50% of like 65 plus 10 years of age attendees listening to Garrick
Give this narrative, yeah.
I loved it. I was so pumped because even before I understood where he's about to wrap this up with, I was like, I know that this is going to be like so brilliantly put together by the end, but it's so insane and like would be seen as going against the grain to be talking about something like this on Christmas Eve that I was pumped listening and also pumped seeing everyone's ears perk up in front of me. But anyway, go on with your wrap up.
But yeah, so this is definitely not a Sunday school story that like little kids hear, but it's there for a reason, and I think that reason really is if you jump ahead to Matthew and you're looking at the genealogy of Christ, there are, I want to say 4, I believe it's 4 women listed, which in genealogies at the time, women were never listed. 4 women are listed, one of which is Tamar. She gave birth to those 2 sons, Perez and Hezron, I believe. I might be blanking on that last one. But Perez he gives birth to a son and continues down the line, and eventually we get Jesus. Jesus is born through their line, through their sin and debauchery and wickedness and like this vile story. God carries on the line of Christ and carries on that line through which he brought a savior to the earth. And I think the redemption in that is like Tamar and Judah were both striving for those things of life. Like Judah wanted to keep his son. He wanted to keep his lineage going. He wanted to find pride in having that son. Like he had wicked desires, and Tamar was just trying to give birth to a son, like, and have that honor. Like they were seeking wrong things, and despite their imperfections and getting caught up in these things and wanting their own desires, God uses that story to give us the birth of Christ, which eventually we see is our Savior. And, just through that story of just wildness, God is able to work. And I just think that's such a powerful story for us, because we're not always going to get it right. We're going to mess up. And sometimes we mess up, right? Judah and Tamar messed up, and because of that, they have 2 sons. You can't run from that pregnancy, right? Sometimes we make those mistakes that stick with us. But just because we're carrying those mistakes with us in this earthly life doesn't mean that God's done with us, or that he doesn't want to use us, or that he can't use us. He was able to use Perez and from their sin and carry on that line of Christ to give birth to Christ, which is the greatest gift that we can have, and was one of the greatest stories of redemption in the Bible, because it's a crazy story, that's for sure.
That's the thing, is I feel like there's a lot of stories in the Bible that, even if you take away like the religious part of it, there's still just like pretty cool stories.
Yeah. And that story, it's so weird, because in Genesis, a lot of people know the story maybe of Joseph going down to Egypt. And this is right in the middle of that. So like chapter 36, Joseph's brothers are selling him into slavery. Then you turn around and you're in this story of Judah and Tamar, and you're like, what is going on? Like, we know Judah's a son. He's one of Joseph's brothers, but like, why are we hearing this story? And then the next chapter just goes right back to Joseph in Egypt. And it's like, what? Like, why is that story there? But, it's 2 Timothy 3:16. I know that reference. It says that all scripture is God-breathed and is the word of God, and is profitable for teaching, training in righteousness. And there's a reason that story's there, and I think really it is to show the redemption of man and God's willingness to use us despite our imperfections.
I agree, but it's not clear-cut why it's there, and requires like that level of critical thinking and connecting the dots that has always impressed me with you, dude, which is crazy. Another thing, and this might be a good a good segue to some Hades stuff, is another thing that you said that like mind boggled me, and assuming that you're willing to put this thought on the table, but is your, I guess, kind of innovative thought on what you could do with plastic in Haiti. And I'm just under the assumption that you're willing to put it on the table, because, on the off chance that the right person listens to it and runs with it, that would be a big win for humanity. But I don't know if I could even explain it how you explained it, but the thought process around using like different organic chem syntheses to convert plastic into things that can be used for like 3D printing.
Yeah. So, I mean, in Haiti, there's a huge, think of just like a landfill and the amount of garbage and just trash laying around.
It's mind-boggling.
It takes a scene it.
Even in the mountains when you're hiking, there's like somehow just plastic seemingly everywhere.
And like when you get to Port-au-Prince, it's like, you can take a picture. I can show you a picture of a mountain of plastic, and you're like, wow, that's crazy. But the picture doesn't do it justice, because any direction you go, like that mountain of plastic just travels with you. Like there's no getting away from it. Going back to like my organic chem days, when 3D printers were like more in the news, I think, than they are today, I was just kind of thinking about it. And I got into some research, and my chemistry would definitely be too rusty to do anything now. It takes some materials studying. But I remember looking into, I kind of did it on paper, but I never did a reaction to see what kind of
like percent yield
percent yield, that's what I was looking for. Thank you. Percent yield, but the type of plastic used in 3D printers, converting, I believe it's high density propylethylene is a commonly used plastic, and converting that into the plastic, I forget the name of it now, that's often used in 3D printers, because 3D printers you can make whatever you want with them. They're making houses with them now in certain areas. they're making like a day and a half. They're just putting together a house that's far better off than like the tin houses you've seen down there in Haiti. You could get into windmill construction, small windmills for like a light bulb, which is more electric, access than a lot of people have down there. You could get into all kinds of, the possibilities are endless when you look at the usages of it. I think the biggest holdup would just be, making the conversion from the plastic you find on the streets to whatever could be used in a 3D printer and having access to a printer and putting stuff together. But I just think it would be, as I was thinking, I was looking at like doing research in grad school or something, maybe in undergrad, revolving around that. And because plastics are an issue worldwide, not just Haiti. And if you could create a solution for, some people are turning them into shirts somehow. They're creating like a woven plastic fiber. But there's all kinds of different ways you could run with that one to, basically create a commodity in the streets of Haiti. Because that's one of their biggest things is they don't have exports. They don't really have a way to create money for their nation. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on there. But yeah, a way to basically incentivize people to use up and monetize that trash laying in the streets.
There's a similar thing, not that similar, but like in New York City, I think it is. You can now use like plastic bottles as a metro ticket. So there's people that are going up, picking up trash just so they can get a free metro ride now. Like they'll go grab like 2 plastic bottles off the street and just use that as their way to get on. So there is like hopefully some good news and stuff in the future with plastic, but it sure does seem like it's taken over everything.
Yeah. Plus, when you told me that, I'm kind of connecting the dots now that you brought that up, Nick. But like, if somehow you kind of refine that synthesis down to a T and got enough 3D printers in somewhere like Haiti for this to be a viable option, you'd still have to, incentivize people to get that plastic. And that could also, in my mind, possibly give some sort of like financial incentive for people to collect that plastic and bring it to like wherever it is that they'd be doing 3D printing. If you could get the resources there to like refund people, if you will, or not refund them, but just fund them in general for like bringing X amount of plastic to you, or them getting the windmill or whatever that's made out of that plastic that they bring would be insane. But anyway, you've been to Haiti how many times now?
I don't know.
Quite a bit of week-long trips.
Probably at least 10, I would say.
Yeah, which is crazy. And that goes for pretty much your whole family going down there. So, and I know this is backtracking a little bit, but when you were debating on going to grad school with the intent on kind of specializing in economic development, and you said that was kind of inspired by your trips to Haiti. I don't know if I ever got to talk about like that full, I will say like inspiration process. Like what was it about going to Haiti that made you want to get more into economic development?
Yeah, I think I've always you've mentioned my connecting the dots here and there. I've always like enjoyed puzzles and problem solving. And when it comes to Haiti, if you're not familiar, like the government is just kind of in shambles. There's really no economy there, and they've kind of been, you hate to say, hurt by the charity work going on there, but for years and years, charity has kind of just been offering free stuff. And I think that it comes out of the right motivations, right? You see somebody in need and you want to help. And when you help, and I give a truckload of free t-shirts away to people. Now they have clothes on their back, but the person in the market down the street trying to sell clothes to feed their family, they can't compete with free. And you see this like cycle where we've created dependency in not just Haiti, but a lot of areas because we want to help and that's great, but we haven't always helped in the right ways. And I think for me, traveling down there, I always saw this problem more so when I, kind of researched and studied a little more as I got older. But I always saw like the problem, like why isn't it better? Why isn't it fixed? Why hasn't anybody come up with a solution? And there's a lot that needs done. But I think for me, looking at economic development, I was interested in getting a better understanding, a better perspective on economies as a whole and ways to stimulate them without creating more issues, and with getting involved in international development where something that might work in a impoverished area here in the States isn't going to work in Haiti just because of the complete difference in infrastructure and access to resources.
Yeah, even just like agriculture, for example, like the really hot conditions there make it hard for, I'd imagine almost all of the U.S. crops that we think of here to actually work in a place like Haiti.
Yeah. And that, so for me, that's kind of what I was interested in, because I never really had any formal economic background. I had done reading on my own. But that's where I was looking for that knowledge, was because I saw a problem, and I had my biology background, and I was leaning towards areas of agriculture and microfinance and stuff that's being done in other areas of the world. But starting something on my own was something that I didn't want to take on without the proper knowledge and make a bad situation worse. By starting something and, getting people involved and, affecting their livelihoods without the proper knowledge is something that I just kind of saw as irresponsible without, the proper knowledge on how to actually make it better.
Yeah. Don't they have some pretty rough... Well, you kind of hinted at it, and I really don't know the nooks and crannies at all, but, like, politically, I know that they've always kind of been in shambles, like, their government. Didn't something really big kind of go down in the last, like, month or so? I don't know, like, exactly what the... what exactly it was that went down. I only know that they had mission trips planned in January and February from Juniper, the missions company that like we have went down there with, and they like canceled all of those missions trip because of something that's going on with the government. But I was never told like exactly what that was.
I'm not exactly sure. I haven't really been following it too closely. Really, it just comes down to political unrest, and it's been like this before when we've been down, not to this extent, but anytime election cycles come around, it's pretty much like this. This is obviously the worst it's been in a while, but just protesting because there's been rigged elections here, stuff like that. Aid after the earthquake, so much aid was thrown at Haiti, and the people never saw it. It went in someone's pocket somewhere, and there's just a lot of corruption, and I don't know all the exact details of it, but I just know that basically it comes down to the people are unhappy with how their government's been taking care of them, and that is now being met with protests. And it's an American citizen is a prime target, right, to garner attention. And a lot of times I've spoken with translators and stuff down there, there are interpreters, they're like, oh, they would never hurt an American, right? They would just your political capital in their eyes, and to get the attention, to call the attention to the issues that they want resolved.
Yeah, I just tried to see if I could find anything in the news, and it says the Haitian government's been facing some nationwide protests calling for its removal after scandals emerged involving the head of state along with other officials in cases of severe corruption, and there's been like fuel shortages, dwindling food supplies, mismanagement of public funds, all sorts of stuff. So there's just a ton of protests going on.
Where do you start?
Yeah,
I mean, it's just
exactly.
People are fed up, which I understand, and it's just they don't always have the voice. So this is the best way to get attention, get the world's attention.
Yeah. All right. So
before we wrap up, something that I have kind of made it a point to ask the, last 4 or 5 guests that I've been with is, and I think I know your answer, but maybe I'm wrong, is I've been just trying to pick people's minds about exactly what sort of knowledge it is they're inputting. So off the top of your head, has there been any like big books or podcasts or documentaries or movies that have really influenced you in the last like 4 or 5 years, that if someone was looking for more knowledge to dig up on like the mentalities and stuff that you have? What sort of like books, podcasts, etc. What do you point to?
Well, that's a good question. I'm terrible at reading because I'll start a book and read 3 chapters and then change topics and go read another book. So I can't really point to one exactly. As far as authors go, when it comes to theology, like A.W. Tozer is a huge one for me. He has a series, a little trilogy that's really good. C.S. Lewis is another great one. I was actually talking with Nick a little bit before we started about podcasts. I've listened to like Freakonomics and Stuff We Should Know are both 2 that I really enjoy, just because they cover such a broad range of topics. There's really nothing that's off bounds for them, and I think that's kind of interesting and kind of really lines up with how I enjoy looking at things. I think everything's kind of connected in some way or another, and I don't know. I kind of see myself as like, I've thought about this before. Like, I've did formal study in biology, theology, and math, and now I'm in ministry, and I've just kind of covered a wide array of topics in my lifetime, looking at economics, personally studying it, and going overseas, and I guess what you would call maybe humanitarian work. So I guess there's not really any one, but those together, and just have showed me a lot of different perspectives on topics, and showed me biases that we can have within ourselves, and it's kind of just helped me open up my eyes. Poverty Inc. was actually a documentary I watched a long time ago that really opened my eyes about charity work and being careful of how we do things. So I think all those in general have kind of helped shape the way I think. So yeah, I guess those would be the ones if I had to make a list.
Awesome, dude. I appreciate it.
Oh, can I throw one more in?
Please.
Francis Schaeffer, How Should We Then Live is a great book.
How
Great
should
read.
we then live?
Yeah, kind of a fun
Add it
title.
to the queue.
Yeah, it's a good one. Good read. Talks about history, culture, how it's shaped itself through time, and through Roman history up until current society. It's kind of an interesting read of science, politics, philosophy, religion.
That sounds pretty cool. I wish I knew more history than I do.
I always am learning more. Like, I've been fascinated studying like the Bible, like getting a historical context to see some of these stories we read in the Bible. It's eye-opening. It's amazing how reading it in context and knowing, like, okay, this was a letter written to a specific church that was dealing with a specific problem. Then as you read down through like that chapter, it's like, oh, that makes a lot more sense now that I know what's going on. And like, I think history in general is something that I would see myself studying more in the future.
Same, yeah. I would love to learn a lot more about it. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh yeah,
this
thanks
awesome.
for having me.
It's a blast.
All right, that'll do
Alrighty.
it.
All right,
Thanks,
everyone. All right, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in. Please track us down on social media. Our Facebook is Insights of All Trades. Our Instagram is @Insights of All Trades. Our Twitter is @IOAT Podcast. And you can find us on Gmail. It is insightsofalltrades@gmail.com. So please just send us in your insights. It would mean a lot to us and a lot to everyone else. Meaning, send in any tips or tricks you've learned through your trade or your passion that you think everyone would benefit from knowing. So until next time, adios.